came to him and verified that my father was right on with everything that was written in the book.
Corso died in 1998. But the material he presented in his book is still controversial. Now, for the first time, the full story of his military career and his startling UFO allegations are being told on television. 1942, the year after the Pearl Harbor attack. Philip Corso, a small-town boy from Pennsylvania, is drafted into the Army. During World War II, he trains as an intelligence officer, and afterward, at the age of only 29, Corso becomes a spy hunter in Rome. His mission, to seek out and terminate Soviet agents.
When the United States Army occupied Rome, what they wanted to was make sure that the post-war government would be a friendly government, not a communist government.
A position with a lot of authority behind it. The man was regarded as an up-and-comer.
By April of 1947, Corso returns to the United States for additional training at the U.S. Army's intelligence school at Fort Riley. 3 months later, in July 1947, comes that fateful night when he claims he has the encounter that shakes him to his core. 32-year-old Corso is the post-duty officer, an assignment that puts him in charge of security at the base. That evening, Fort Riley is buzzing with rumors. 5 trucks containing debris from a mysterious aircraft accident in Roswell, New Mexico, have arrived at the base in Kansas. Corso, with his training as an intelligence officer, is intrigued by the shipment. At about 11 p.m., Corso says he enters the building where the Roswell shipment is stored. A guard on duty tells Corso that he has already looked into one of the crates making up the shipment and cannot comprehend what he's just seen. Corso then says he has a look for himself.
And he sees these, they look like coffins. They're little, they're like kid coffins. Can't figure out what that is. So he goes and he picks up the tarp.
It looked like a thin body, and a humanoid was a sort of a big head on it, and eyes, but not too long, and not, the shape of it was not as wide, as I say, as our bodies are.
Corso says this was his first encounter with extraterrestrials, but it would not be his last, nor his most significant. Later, he would be given top-secret files and alien artifacts that, he claims, would generate a new technological world order. But in 1947, that day was still a decade away. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 puts a hold on Philip Corso's ruminations on extraterrestrial beings. Corso joins General Douglas MacArthur's staff as an artillery targeting specialist for UN forces. After the 1953 armistice, he remains in Asia, serving as an intelligence officer, repatriating American and Allied prisoners of war.
I came to know Phil Corso because he had been a special projects officer in the Far East Command for prisoners of war under MacArthur, and then later held the same role and capacity for the National Security Council as a staffer in the Eisenhower White House.
According to his military records, in July of 1953, Corso is promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel. He says he is a trusted advisor to President Dwight D. Eisenhower, informing him of what Corso asserts is rampant KGB infiltration within the CIA.
And Corso was screaming about this in the National Security Council to Eisenhower.
Corso states that Eisenhower rewards him with his own combat command. In 1957, military records confirm Corso is placed in charge of an artillery battalion at Red Canyon Missile Range. By October of that year, Corso commands the battalion in West Germany, where he develops new targeting strategies for nuclear strikes.
He's shown he can do the one thing, he'll follow orders, but he's shown initiative.
He had sole command of a nuclear weapons battery. Now, in the event that war would have broken out with the Soviet Union in the 50s, when Corso was in Germany, he would have had sole authority to release his nuclear weapons.
But after Corso returns from Germany, his career dramatically changes direction. The gifted intelligence officer, fearless spy hunter, and artillery commander who controlled the world's most powerful weapon now becomes a reservist in the National Guard. In October of 1960, Corso is virtually in retirement, a part-time unit advisor to a National Guard base in Maryland.
You could say it meant that some people were displeased with him, but it's just as easy to say he didn't have what it takes.
But Corso's supporters believe Corso is being groomed for his most important and most secret assignment.
Now there is a big green hand running his career. That big green hand is the hand of Arthur Trudeau.
Philip Corso has a powerful mentor in Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau. A West Point graduate, class of 1924, Trudeau quickly gains a reputation as a forward-thinking officer, comfortable with high technology. In the Cold War era, he pioneers technological training for intelligence officers, and by 1958 is named Director of Army Research and Development.
When Trudeau gets a chance to appoint a deputy, he brings Corso over, and thus begins Corso's stint in Army R&D.
General called me and said, Don, establish Foreign Technology Division, and you're the chief of it. And you got an office down next floor under me.
Through this point in his career, Corso's Army job history is easily verified by examining military records.
Look, he did work in the Pentagon. His office was there. I have the roster. And he worked for General Trudeau, and he certainly knew him well. There's no question about that.
But after his Pentagon appointment, the paper trail of his career is harder to follow, and his assertions more difficult to confirm. Corso wrote that his Pentagon job entailed analyzing foreign military hardware, such as helicopter armament developed by the French, or the British military's vertical takeoff and landing fighter. Then the technology would be reverse engineered.
The military has had, over the years, a number of projects where enemy technological devices have been recovered by American forces.
So one of Corso's jobs was to get this foreign technology, this French technology, and reverse engineer it.
And then if they had something good, fed into our own technological timeline.
Reverse engineering plays a significant role in the spycraft of the Cold War era. The Soviets used captured American Sabre jets to reverse engineer U.S. technology, and the U.S. captured Soviet MiGs to reverse engineer Soviet technology. But if Corso's routine job involves examining technology from abroad, his task would soon change. Sometime after July 20th, 1961, Corso claims that General Trudeau calls him into his office and gives him an astounding directive. Examine technology captured from the 1947 alien spaceship crash in Roswell, New Mexico. Trudeau has a filing cabinet delivered to Corso's Pentagon office. Inside, Corso says, is proof positive of aliens visiting Earth and alien technology that Corso insists he will use to change the world. In 1947, Philip Corso claimed to have seen alien bodies from the infamous UFO crash near Roswell, New Mexico. Corso's description is consistent with those who claim to be eyewitnesses to the crash. The aliens, according to these witnesses, were 4 small human-like beings with 4-fingered hands, thin legs and feet, an oversized head, and large almond-shaped eyes. These descriptions purportedly appear in these classified documents prepared by government investigators. To this day, the documents have not been authenticated. Corso insists that he told no one about what he saw at Fort Riley. But in the summer of 1961, the 46-year-old lieutenant colonel is assigned to a Pentagon project that will force him to recall his eerie experiences.
He was assigned to the Army's research development at the Pentagon. Once again, a position with a lot of authority.
His goal? To advance U.S. military superiority by a factor of decades.
We had enough sense to push it. We had the organization, and we had the money, and we had the brains to do it, and we did it.
During the Cold War era, Corso says, there was great government concern that the Russians would gain access to the alien materials. Or worse, the aliens would use their superior technology to invade Earth. According to Corso, an ordinary filing cabinet contains the extraordinary artifacts of the Roswell crash. A piece of super strong metallic cloth. Corso contends it may have protected the alien pilots in their spacecraft. A tube that appears to shoot a searing red light. Corso thinks it might be a surgical instrument or a weapon. An alien-made headband that, according to his military reports, might have been used to transmit thoughts or control the alien craft. An imprinted set of miniaturized circuits, perhaps a prefabricated microcircuit. A flexible wire that might have transmitted light through its interior. And a lens that could allow anyone to see in the dark, supposedly taken from the eye of an alien being. To better understand the puzzling contents of the filing cabinet, Corso claims to immerse himself in classified government documents reporting on alien technology supposedly found at Roswell. According to the reports that Corso claims to have read, some of the world's foremost scientists, men like Wernher von Braun and J. Robert Oppenheimer, have access to the Roswell crash site. Corso says that Lieutenant General Trudeau greenlights him to assemble his own A-list team.
You will put on that team anybody that you want. Engineers, scientists, and even I told the Germans. Told them I'll take a couple of Germans too, in addition to the U.S. scientists.
Corso claims that based upon his close readings of the Roswell reports, he developed his own theories about how the alien craft may have functioned.
What Corso said was that the spacecraft had a way to jump. It didn't fly from wherever it came from to here. It jumped. And he said that's all they knew, that there was a wave around the spacecraft that allowed it somehow not to be a spacecraft, but a time machine. And the reason is that to travel the kinds of vast distances it had to travel, it had to leave what we understand in physics as a space-time continuum, drop out of that, and suddenly reappear in a new spot.
In Corso's personal notes are sketches detailing his concepts. Corso speculates that the alien craft is navigated by a mind control interface fitting the alien cranium.
It seemed as though by revolving the headband around the alien brain drawings, you would match up the pickups on the headband with various parts of the alien brain.
His background research complete, Corso maintains he is ready to move on to the next phase, distribution. He will hand off the alien technology he says comes from Roswell to appropriate defense contractors for development.
Try to imagine what would happen if a spaceship crashed on Earth and there was a fabulous piece of technology and somebody like Corso pulled it out and gave it to research labs and said, here guys, figure out how this works.
The result, Corso maintains, will lead to a complete reconfiguring of the world's most advanced technologies. In the early 1960s, America's military might is directed toward fighting the Cold War. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso wants to bring alien technology from Roswell into the fray. By the end of the summer of 1961, he maintains that he begins to contact military weapons labs about his alien artifacts.
Now, the Army laboratories also had civilian scientists there, and they developed this relationship of handling classified material. Phil Corso felt very comfortable working through the Army laboratories to the civilian scientists because the clearances were all taken care of by the laboratory.
America is dotted with top-secret high-tech labs where civilian scientists work on sensitive military projects. Los Alamos, home of the Manhattan Project, is perhaps the most famous. But in 1961, Fort Belvoir in Virginia is quietly working on a decade-long project to develop night vision engineering. Corso claims he makes this lab the first he approaches with alien technology.
In order to get these things reverse engineered properly, you couldn't just take this to a Radio Shack. I mean, it had to go to a place where somebody would understand the technology.
According to Corso, Roswell eyewitnesses report that the alien craft has image-intensifying technology. If one went inside the ship and looked out, the world outside would look as bright as day, even at night. There is also, according to Corso, a lens taken out of an alien's eye that has light-enhancing properties. No one knows how the two are related, says Corso, but he knows their potential value. Corso maintains that by the late summer of 1961, he helps researchers at Fort Belvoir by showing them the alien light-enhancing lens and possibly other light-enhancing technology from the Roswell craft.
This was the kind of technology that, although we think we have a very clear line of development going back to the Second World War, we take a look at how this technology has literally geometrically exploded over the years. Now, can this be attributed to this technology that was picked up at Roswell, according to Corso? Well, according to him, it can be.
Corso says he wasn't able to further develop the alien mind control interface. His theory was that it would only function with an alien brain. But this momentary setback, he claims, didn't forestall development of another Roswell artifact, an imprinted circuit of mysterious design.
We also had a little charred chip. Small thing, maybe 3/8 of an inch square, two threads coming out, and a little window in the center with thin wires. These came from Roswell. We didn't know exactly the function of the integrated circuits, but we suspected that these were circuits, electrical circuits.
Corso asserts that he brings the object to Bell Labs, which had developed the transistor 14 years earlier. He says scientists there were able to analyze and later recreate the alien microchip.
What would happen if something like that were to occur. Well, what would happen is, in a very short time, the world would be transformed radically.
There's no doubt that after the development of the integrated circuit in the early 1960s, the world is transformed. Electronic devices from the cell phone to the laptop computer become reality. Corso claims the Roswell microchip was supposedly damaged from the crash, but that in his possession is another alien object, this one apparently fully functioning.
He knows from reports that when people were shining this thing around, it caused burning on the surfaces that it was aimed at.
Corso says he reads classified military reports speculating that the artifact from Roswell, apparently capable of burning holes in walls, is some kind of cutting tool, perhaps used for surgery. At Hughes Aircraft, from the late 1950s into the early 1960s, researchers have been working on what would become the first laser tracking and targeting devices for military aircraft. But engineers have run into a snag in their efforts to create a practical device. That is, Corso asserts, until he shows them the alien cutting tool.
It did accelerate after 1960-61 because people figured out new ways to make lasers. And as the science advanced, the engineering advanced.
Corso's filing cabinet reportedly contains another treasure from the Roswell trove.
It was glass tubes. And they emitted different color lights. And those were sent to Bell Laboratories. From that was one of the greatest advancements I think we have today, came out in fiber optics.
Many UFO researchers theorized that the spacecraft had no wiring because it was fitted instead with fiber optic cable. Transmitting information with light happens to be an old technology. It dates back to one of the pioneers of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, who experimented with a device he called the photophone in 1880.
Most people have never heard of it, but back in his day, serious scientists thought that the photophone was a more impressive invention than the telephone. The photophone was a way that you could transmit a voice signal over a beam of light.
Corso's research tells him that data transmission via light had failed because scientists could not direct a beam of light around corners. But Corso contends that the Roswell artifacts might hold the answer.
They were looking at this glass fibers and say, wow, the light actually turns a corner. How can light go in curves? And then they concluded the reason for that was because it had a cladding wrap on it. The cladding was the key discovery you had to make in order to make fiber optics work.
Although it would not be until the 1970s that fiber optics were in general use, UFO researchers believed that the cladding wrap on the alien artifact, an outer covering on the fiber that guided the light, made it possible for earthly fiber optics to advance. Corso also says he examined some curious super strong fibers that his military reports claim come from the aliens' flight suits.
The first thing of the fabric that amazed me was a thread that I couldn't cut with a razor blade. Just a thread.
In his book, Corso offers a theory about the fibers composing the alien flight suits.
The alien bodies, probably the more vulnerable aspects, were protected from what had to be incredible energies by the super tenacity of the fabric, which somehow formed a shield. And Corso said they didn't put these on, they were woven around them. In other words, they spun them like a cocoon.
According to Corso, he wonders if these super strong fibers could be developed into super strong bulletproof shields for law enforcement and military use.
Corso said that the Army tried to bring it to the University of Colorado to try and fabricate this technology.
The mid-1960s saw great advances in super-strong fabrics that used polymer technology, the type of molecules that Corso claimed were present in his alien fabric. In 1965, Kevlar was invented, a fabric that would be used in bulletproof vests. More proof, according to Corso, of the impact of alien technology. There's no denying that the period Corso works in the Pentagon coincides with a period of rapid technological growth in the United States. Corso's supporters say alien technology played a role, but others see things very differently. In his best-selling book, The Day After Roswell, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso claimed to introduce alien technology from the 1947 Roswell crash to the American military's technological agenda. But others say that the scientific leaps of the 1960s were not made by one hero, and not with the help of aliens.
It's nice to think in terms of one heroic person leading us into the new world of far-out technology learned from saucers. That sounds great. But having worked on a whole host of big research and development programs, that isn't the way it works. Look, on the aircraft nuclear propulsion program, we employed 3,500 people. 1,100 of them were engineers and scientists. We were spending $100 million a year. That's the kind of effort it takes to develop new technology. And that was in 1958 dollars at that.
Corso claims that the laser jumped from theory to practice after scientists examined the device found in the Roswell crash debris. But to science historians, that's science fiction.
The laser is a good example of an invention that doesn't really have a single eureka moment where somebody gets a brilliant inspiration and then they go down into their basement workshop and 15 minutes later they've hammered together a laser. The laser really began back in 1951 when a physicist from Columbia University was taking a walk in Washington.
That physicist was Charles Towns.
And I woke up early in the morning worrying about it. Why hadn't we been able to get anywhere? It was before breakfast, so I went out and walked out in the park, sat down in the park. Suddenly I said, hey, wait a minute. We can get a whole collection of molecules all in excited states with excess energy. And I wrote down the numbers to see now, could I make it oscillate?
And it took him 2 years and $50,000 in government grants before he could come up with the very first barely operable microwave laser.
The first laser device used microwaves rather than light. The light-emitting version wasn't functional until 1960, 9 years after Professor Towns jotted down his notes. As for aliens jump-starting the process,
No, aliens had nothing to do with the technology of the laser, nor do I. Unfortunately, I don't think aliens have given us any new information yet.
while the laser's development was slow and steady, the integrated circuit advanced rapidly. But the greatest progress was made by scientists well after Corso retired.
The real breakthrough happened in 1971 when a guy named Ted Hoff conceived of the idea of putting an entire microprocessor on one piece of silicon, a computer on a chip.
Basically what happens in an integrated circuit is that you are controlling the flow of electrons, or actually in some cases the absence of electrons.
Ted Hoff, known as the architect of the microprocessor, started working on integrated circuits in 1968. Hoff disputes Corso's claim that an alien chip captured from the Roswell crash made an earthly version conceivable.
If you have a crash scenario, there's presumably damage done, and that damage may make the device even harder to analyze. And even if you had the device, you'd really want a context. If you had seen this device in those days and had no context to put it in other words, what's it used for, you'd even have less chance of understanding it.
Hoff also says that to reverse engineer an integrated circuit, as Corso claimed happened in 1961, you would need a scanning electron microscope, which was not invented until 1966.
Even looking at devices today, the resolution of the devices are such that ordinary optical microscopes really don't reveal them. So you'd need something more sophisticated. I don't think at that time anybody would have been able to figure out what it was.
Philip Corso also claimed that his alien fiber optics cable inspired scientists. But science historians don't support his assertion because fiber optics required a convergence of technologies occurring over decades of development.
The idea really became interesting in 1965 when lasers were available and people suddenly realized there was a commercial use for fiber optics. So shortly after that, the project was tackled by a trio of inventors at Corning, and they came up with a successful fiber optic in 1970.
The highly directional light of a laser improved signal strength. The team of researchers at Corning Glass created a form of fused silica. This super pure glass material was capable of carrying 65,000 times more information than copper wire. This made fiber optics commercially practical 10 years after Corso claimed to have accelerated the technology.
That's the real achievement that Don Keck and Peter Schultz and Bob Maurer came up with when they were at Corning. It was coming up with this completely unexpected way to make glass.
Corso also stated that he inspired a quantum leap in image enhancement technology. But science historians say the technology of turning night into day was also decades in the making.
Progress increased so incrementally. It goes all the way back to the 1940s when image intensifying radar scopes were issued to Allied troops in the Pacific Theater.
The first night vision gear employed thermal imaging. Developed by the Germans during World War II, it brought heat energy into the visible spectrum using an infrared light and a receiver. Then, by the early 1960s, William Spicer, a Defense Department researcher, had created image intensification technology. Fort Belvoir scientists built upon his work. Image intensification requires no additional light. Functioning like a radio receiver for light waves, it amplifies existing light. Today's image intensifiers are small enough to be worn as goggles and are capable of amplifying light by a factor of 35,000. Scientists suggest that if Corso really had an alien image enhancer, showing it to researchers in the 1960s did little to advance the technology's measured progress.
The engineering that was required just progressed at a very slow rate. Making night vision work was largely the result of really brilliant engineering.
Finally, according to technology experts, Corso's super tenacity fibers came not from alien spacesuits, but from years of research by a scientist named Stephanie Kwolek, who worked at the DuPont Company. She learned how to organize super strong chains of atoms in 1965, and by 1971, Kevlar was on the market.
The theory that something like Kevlar came off a flying saucer strikes me as being insulting to someone like Stephanie Kwolek, who poured enormous amounts of effort, years of her life, tremendous dedication and brain power went into cracking the secrets of nature.
Furthermore, some skeptics insist Lieutenant Colonel Corso simply didn't have the technical background to run a reverse engineering program.
I read something he'd written years ago and found that it was not high-tech. I worked for General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, TRW Systems, McDonnell Douglas, with lots of technical people. I'm a physicist myself. And I saw nothing in what Corso had written that gave any indication of his having the knowledge, the skills, the talent, the background to handle stuff like this and get it into industry.
Corso had an answer to this objection, claiming that his team of A-list scientists helped him interpret the Roswell cache.
I didn't have the training or the background for something. You know, they got highly technical. But fortunately, the German scientists were there. I knew von Braun, and I knew Hermann Obert. Obert was a man that said we've been helped. But we had to keep it quiet to protect our budget, protect our organization.
For doubters, there is also the issue of Corso's rank. A lieutenant colonel, some argue, wouldn't be running things as Corso claimed he was.
I think an indication of his value to the military would have been given by the fact that he was not a full colonel, despite all his years in service.
But others stand by Corso's assertions, particularly those who say they're familiar with the way the U.S. military functions.
Back in those days, you know, a lieutenant colonel had a lot more authority and position than a lieutenant colonel today has. And even today, you've got lieutenant colonels doing quite a bit of the important tactical and even strategic planning and operation.
The History Channel contacted the military contractors Corso claims to have worked with, and all say there was no alien involvement in the technologies Corso says he jump-started. No memos, directives, or paperwork of any kind exist to directly support Corso's assertions about reverse engineering alien technology. But Corso's supporters say there is no paper trail for a very good reason. Among those who believe there was an alien crash near Roswell, there is consensus on one concept. The U.S. government systematically suppressed the truth.
The government of the United States and other governments around the world have gone out of their way to keep that wrapped up inside a riddle that's smothered by an enigma.
Philip Corso says he also had to keep his reverse engineering program under wraps.
We couldn't discuss it. We made a decision. It cannot be discussed outside of us. We're doing good. We have the authority, we have the money for our R&D projects. Well, that's fine. Let's keep it that way. Let's not get mixed up in the murky area of whether they exist or not.
As for Corso's contributions to the advancement of science, skeptics say that the technology he claimed to have pushed forward was ready to emerge anyway. As proof, they offer up the mind control headband, one alien technology that Corso did not claim to develop. Today, it's well on its way to becoming a reality without his help. Since the 1970s, scientists have been experimenting with using EEG readouts of brainwaves to provide feedback and change behavior. It's now possible to use EEG feedback games like this one to learn how to manage brain states. But mind control technology has advanced even further than that.
Going to open the first email, which says congrats. It says you...
In 2004, researchers received FDA approval to test tiny brain implants designed to allow disabled people to control computers using their thoughts.
Next, I'm going to paint a circle.
UFO researchers say the government's supposed cover-up may forever obscure the facts of Roswell, and therefore also obscure the truth about whether alien technology played a supporting role in the development of fiber optics, super-strong fabrics, lasers, integrated circuits, or battle-ready image enhancement.
Some people think that, for example, aliens intervened in 3500 BC in Egypt to help the Egyptians build pyramids. You know, well, doggone it, the Egyptians of 3500 BC were fully capable of putting big blocks on top of other big blocks, right? If the Egyptians had suddenly developed cell phones or something like that, then I would say, okay, there's intervention there. But that's not what they did.
But while Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso might be questioned, his ideas were strictly forbidden by the Kremlin.
In his time, brochures were printed in a samizdat way. They were collections of observations and letters, typed in 5 to 10 copies. All materials were typed with the use of carbon paper.
Samizdat papers were distributed by trustworthy messengers who secretly carried the copies from one person to the next. UFO information circulated in this covert manner until 1967, when suddenly it seemed as if ufologists were given a reprieve from government censure. Today it appears this respite was a smokescreen, part of an intricate government deception. The complex ruse began in 1967 when citizens reported multiple sightings of crescent-shaped UFOs over the skies of the Ukraine and the lower Volga Valley.
It was also seen as far south as the Caucasus Mountains, where many astronomers in observatories in the Caucasus Mountains would see these objects flying horizontally from west to east, crescent-shaped, heading toward the east.
For reasons unknown at the time, the government allowed press coverage and independent study of the sightings. Felix Ziegel was granted permission to form a government-sanctioned investigative committee made up of over 200 scientific and military experts. In October 1967, they convened at the Central House of Aviation and Cosmonautics in Moscow. Their goal? Determine the cause of the mass sightings. On television and in newspapers, Ziegel's committee appealed to Soviet citizens to report information on UFOs. For the first time in Soviet history, UFOs seemed to be an open topic.
It was like a breath of fresh air. Freedom of discussion about a forbidden subject was permitted to the Soviet citizens. And this was something unheard of. And alas, it did not last long.
Within a few months of Ziegel's televised appeal, the steel jaws of Soviet censorship clamped down. Reporting of UFOs was once again off limits. The subject was dropped from the controlled media, and Ziegel's committee was ordered to disband.
The committee was to encourage people to report. As soon as the reports began to gather, somebody in Moscow quashed the activity, canceled the committee, canceled publication of further works, and put a lid on it.
Cries of a Kremlin whitewash were immediately sounded.
Why the cover-up takes place, I don't know. Is there a cover-up? There's no question about it.
But what they were covering up is the question. UFO buffs believe they were covering up alien visitations. I think the evidence is clear they were covering up descriptions of their own secret military aircraft and missile activities and satellite activities.
Scientist and NASA consultant James Oberg came to this conclusion in 1977 after studying Soviet space vehicle launch patterns and comparing them to the dates of the 1967 sightings. He deduced that the crescent-shaped objects witnessed in the sky were not alien in nature, but could be attributed to secret tests of a new Soviet missile warhead.
People in the area saw the rockets, especially at night, saw the streamers, the contrails in the sky, even heard the rockets. They were told by the government that there was nothing there, that it was not anything ours. It became a UFO phenomena.
Later dubbed by the Pentagon as a fractional orbital bombardment system, the Soviets had good reason to keep the tests secret.
It was designed to sneak under our radar as a first strike weapon. It was one of these scary things that you only build it if you mean to make a sneak attack. It was also illegal to have such a weapon because in 1967, the U.S. and Russia and other countries signed a treaty forbidding the placing of nuclear weapons into orbit.
But why, after crushing public dissemination of UFO information for years, did the government briefly loosen its restrictions in 1967? It appears now to have been a deliberate ploy to fool its citizens and the international community about the true nature of the sightings.
The Soviet government did not want the public to understand what was going on. They didn't want the Americans to know, for example, what was going on. It was a useful camouflage. It diverted people's attention. Because it was a UFO, Western journalists would laugh rather than investigate it. The cover-up by the Soviet government is in letting people think they're flying saucers.
The strategy backfired when the extensive UFO data collected by Felix Ziegel's committee was published in magazines.
The Soviet government realized what these reports really were. They're military secrets. Not described accurately, but accurately enough to be of use to the CIA if they ever caught on. The government said, "Oh my gosh," and other things in Russian, and said no more UFO reports get published in the Soviet Union.
For 10 years, public discussion of UFOs was effectively brought to a halt. But that would change in 1977 with the appearance of a strange-looking object over Soviet skies, witnessed by thousands of astonished citizens. September 20th, 1977. As dawn approached in the small Russian port city of Petrozavodsk, a spectacular aerial display lit up the skies. The incident would become one of the most studied UFO sightings in Soviet history.
The phenomenon of Petrozavodsk is one of the greatest abnormal phenomena on the territory of our country.
At approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, civilians and military personnel reported seeing huge star-like apparitions shooting in the sky.
As it flew up in the sky, it appeared to come over the city and then head off toward the horizon. People who were out in the streets of the town saw this blazing jellyfish streaming tentacles down from the saucer-shaped bright core.
The impressive display lasted approximately 10 minutes. Witnesses claimed that a host of strange occurrences on the ground accompanied the sighting.
They reported all sorts of phenomena. They smelled ozone, computers were crashing, drivers lost control of their vehicles and went into ditches.
Perhaps the phenomenon most difficult to explain was the appearance of finely glazed holes in glass windows and rocks around the city.
There is no explanation for this fact, but the connection is direct by the time parameters. There had been no holes before the event, and then they appeared.
Witnessed by thousands, the aerial display above Petrozavodsk was impossible to refute. While the sighting remained a mystery to Soviet citizens, NASA consultant James Oberg quickly discovered its origins.
Because of my connection with the space program and my knowledge of satellites and rockets, I was able to find out within a matter of hours. There was a rocket launching that morning from a secret space center north of Moscow at precisely the time people were seeing this UFO.
The jellyfish-like display was triggered by the launch of the Cosmos 955 spy satellite. As the rocket engine contrails were backlit by the rising morning sun, it produced the tentacle effect observed by witnesses.
So this what they call basically the smoking gun of Soviet ufology. They call it a Medusa, or jellyfish UFO, because it was streamers of light coming down from the streamers in the rocket engines of the rocket, as it turned out.
As with previous mass sightings, the government had ample reason to keep the truth hidden from Soviet citizens. The satellite was launched from a secret military space center called Plesetsk, one of several undisclosed missile bases scattered throughout the Soviet Union. Most ufologists accept the satellite launch as the cause of the aerial display. But many argue it does not fully clarify the mystery.
How shall we explain the appearance of some beams that burnt the glass? When the pieces of the glass were analyzed at the Institute of Metrology in Moscow, they concluded that these holes resulted from badly glazed window glass. That is, a purely technical defect took place.
I do not believe that the launch of a secret military satellite would explain the holes that were made in the glass. My personal opinion, no, this was not man-made technology that's responsible for such effects.
There were some reports of holes being drilled into glass window panes and in paving stones. I saw those reports. I can't explain it. And all these sorts of additional phenomena, these additional reports, are typical of what happens when people see a very sudden, shocking sight in the sky and look around them for corroborative evidence. Most of the time, it's irrelevant, independent, and sometimes even imaginary.
While the mysterious holes might never be fully explained, the Petrozavodsk incident had much deeper consequences inside the walls of the Kremlin.
The upshot of this incident was the decision of the Soviet government to create a secret program to study UFOs.
In the weeks following the Petrozavodsk sighting, the Soviet Academy of Sciences received inquiries from several European nations concerned about the nature of the event. In response, the Academy of Sciences requested permission from the Kremlin to initiate a top-secret investigation of anomalous occurrences. Although aware the majority of these events were not paranormal in nature, the scientists admitted in their request that they could not provide a scientific basis for all UFO sightings.
The Academy of Sciences can neither ignore or explain the paranormal phenomena similar to that observed in September 1977 in Petrozavodsk. The program was organized to show that we did not know the answers to these questions and would be studying it on the scientific level. That was the way the official scientific program for studying abnormal phenomena and extraterrestrial flying objects started its work in the Soviet Union.
In 1978, the investigation that later became known as Institute 22 was formally started. The study lasted 13 years and was completely concealed from public view. But why did the Soviet government spend time and money to investigate a phenomenon it already knew the origins of?
There's really no surprise that the Soviet military, even if they understood the nature of most of these reports, would still investigate them. The Soviets traditionally spied on themselves as severely as they spied on the West.
If they already knew that these are missile tests, why do they have to have a nationwide study behind the scenes? I mean, it's not like the results of the study were ever going to be published anywhere. It was a secret. So it makes no sense.
While the rationale for the beginnings of the study is still debated, there is no doubt the scope of the investigation was far-reaching. The Institute 22 inquiry was conducted jointly between the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense.
It was very useful for the Academy of Sciences to collaborate and to carry out studies together with the Ministry of Defense, because naturally it was much easier for the Ministry of Defense to get the information we had no access to.
The armed forces were ordered to study what, if any, influence possible UFOs might have on the proper functioning of technical military equipment. In addition, hundreds of thousands of sailors, soldiers, and pilots were recruited to watch for and report on UFOs. No one was told why the reports were being taken.
The Ministry of Defense has an enormous observance potential. First, military units are located all over the country. Second, unlike civil organizations, an order from the Minister of Defense is sufficient for making a potential viewer of each military man, and this was done.
Every single unit in the vast Soviet military empire had to comply with this study. That is, any UFO, any anomalous object, any ball of light, any strange thing in the sky whatsoever had to be fully investigated.
Scientists were directed to investigate the physical nature of alleged paranormal phenomena. The data collected by the military and scientists was analyzed in a lab located in a nondescript building in a suburb of Moscow.
The personnel of the laboratory were not numerous. Not more than 10 people, and this number was never exceeded. But the specialists from almost all the scientific areas worked there, from a physician to specialists in radioelectronics, meteorology, and astrogeophysics. Practically all the specialists were represented there. It was done in order to study all possible aspects of UFOs.
6 years into the study, Institute 22 would be called on to scrutinize an incident of global consequence, when a suspected UFO incident placed the world on the brink of nuclear war. The early 1980s were a time of tense relations between the Soviet Union and the West. The era of détente had ended, and the Russian landscape was studded with intercontinental ballistic missile silos. Each contained nuclear weapons aimed westward. It was at one of these silos that a reported UFO incident caused a nuclear scare. Today, this ICBM silo in the Ukraine is deserted, dismantled in compliance with a nuclear arms reduction treaty between the US and USSR. But at this silo in 1982, something went terribly wrong. It started at approximately 6 p.m. when soldiers and villagers in the nearby town of Bielo-Korovichi witnessed a strange object in the dusk sky. A military officer at the time described what he saw.
I was riding a motorcycle not far from here. I saw a large object in the air. It had a perfect geometric shape.
At the same moment inside the silo, an emergency warning light indicated that a nuclear missile had switched to launch mode.
The most telling testimony comes from the communications officer who said that somehow something entered the correct code.
But Moscow had not ordered a launch, nor had any personnel in the bunker touched the control panel. For 15 agonizing seconds, technicians frantically scrambled to stop the launch. Then, without explanation, the launch sequence was aborted.
They were ready for launch. The UFO, poof, goes away. Poof, the command control module goes back to normal.
Had a UFO somehow interfered with the launch controls of a nuclear missile? A team of investigators from Institute 22, the secret state-sponsored UFO research team, was immediately ordered to the missile base.
They established within a very short period, literally half a day, that a military training exercise took place at a nearby aerial ground.
Investigators learned that the sighting occurred at the same time and in the same area where the military was testing flares. Dropped out of planes, the flares provided 5 to 7 minutes of illumination. That explained the strange display in the sky. But why did the nuclear launch sequence activate?
The fact that the emergency situation coincided with the effects which took place is certainly a remarkable coincidence, but it is still a coincidence.
The ICBM control equipment was systematically taken apart and rebuilt, but no defects were found.
It's not just an electrical malfunction. Something entered the correct launch codes. That just doesn't happen every day. We hear from our government UFOs are not a matter of national security. The Russian government has been telling its people the same thing. They're trying to confuse us. This incident is clear evidence, if ever there was, that UFOs do carry national security implications.
After examining the ICBM episode, the investigative team of Institute 22 continued to scrutinize various sightings around the country. Some who reported UFOs had a much closer view than those on Earth. Cosmonauts.
The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, is quoted in the Thread 3 documents as saying, "I can tell you that UFOs are real, and if you allow me, I'll tell you a lot more." The second man in space, cosmonaut Titov, said that there were 7 UFOs dancing around his space capsule during his brief flight into space.
However, even to this day, most cosmonauts are reluctant to speak about any unusual phenomenon they witnessed in space.
There's a ridicule factor, there's a laughter curtain, there are career consequences from reporting a UFO and taking it seriously.
But in this rare interview obtained by the History Channel, 2 cosmonauts spoke of unusual objects they encountered in space.
Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke of such things.
Former Commander Vladimir Kovalyonik of the Salyut 6 space station revealed that on May 5, 1981, he observed an unrecognizable illuminated entity outside the porthole of his craft.
The object had an elliptical shape and flew with us. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. It produced a golden light, very beautiful to watch. A second explosion followed, and two spheres appeared. As we entered the darkness of Earth's shadow, I could no longer see them.
On a Mir mission in 1991, cosmonaut Musa Manarov managed to videotape an anomalous object during a routine docking procedure.
I was looking out the biggest window. It was directly in front of me. I am familiar with the construction of all spaceships, but this was different.
There is ongoing debate about sightings of unidentified objects by cosmonauts and American astronauts alike. Skeptics insist there is enough debris left in orbit to constitute a plethora of unusual sightings. As cosmonauts traveled amidst the stars, the 1990s saw major changes take place on Soviet soil. When the walls of communism crumbled, American UFO investigator George Knapp ventured to Russia, hoping to discover just what secrets the Soviets had been hiding about alien encounters. What he found was startling. Beginning in the mid-1980s, the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union conducted several summits aimed at reducing both nuclear arms and tensions between the two superpowers. Shortly after one such meeting, President Ronald Reagan revealed he and Mikhail Gorbachev had discussed the topic of alien encounters.
I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries.
Reagan made 5 different public statements, including one to the United Nations, that, well, boy, wouldn't it be something if UFOs were suddenly a threat to us and we'd all get together? And sort of Gorbachev kind of responded, yeah, it sure would. You know, we would get together. Lo and behold, we did get together. You know, the wall came tumbling down, perestroika, glasnost.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union came a new era of openness in Russia. Thousands of miles away in Las Vegas, Nevada, investigative journalist George Knapp, who had studied many American UFO incidents, realized the time was perfect to explore Russian reports.
3 years ago, we have succeeded in obtaining several hundred pages of secret Russian UFO documents and photos. Other Western journalists followed. Today, it's a new ballgame. The lid has been dropped on government UFO files, although there is still plenty of information to be found.
It occurred to me, now may be the time to go ahead and try to find out what the Russians know about UFOs. It was a tumultuous, crazy time, but a wonderful time to be there as a journalist.
In 1993, Knapp traveled to Russia and was introduced to Boris Sokolov, the coordinator of Institute 22. Like many government-funded scientific projects from the era, Institute 22's funding had been cut and the project disbanded. Sokolov provided Knapp with some of the recently declassified UFO files, containing information on the cases that were more difficult to explain.
He had culled from the thousands of reports some of the most interesting ones and had kept them in these binders, and we were able to get them and bring them back.
Why would the Russian military study all of this stuff?
Colonel Sokolov said it was a very practical reason. They knew that UFOs could do things that their planes couldn't. Figured by studying it, they may be able to get an advantage over us in terms of stealth technology.
Upon returning to the United States, Knapp made some of the files public. As a result, Colonel Sokolov was ridiculed by some back in his homeland.
Officially, Russia was a democracy, but the communists still had a lot of influence. There were communist newspapers that attacked him broadly as being a sellout to Mother Russia.
But the public scorn Sokolov endured was certainly less severe than the consequences he might have been subject to in the old Soviet Union.
My friend put it this way. He said, if this had happened 5 years ago, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years ago, we'd all be shot for giving up these secrets.
But in 2000, the relaxed political climate allowed Sokolov and scientist Yuli Platov to publish a report summarizing the findings of Institute 22. Entitled The History of UFO State Research in the USSR, the report concluded that of the 3,000 UFO sightings investigated, 90 to 95% of the incidents could be attributed to man-made phenomenon, mostly missile launches and research balloons.
The remaining 5 to 10% could not be easily explained. He was not willing to conclude that any of these things were extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or aliens from the future or anything of that sort.
The thing is that before, the enthusiastic ufologists had affirmed in literature that all we saw was due to contacts with the extraterrestrial civilizations. No. It turned out that only a very small percentage of events remained unexplained.
But in a land that for so long concealed information and suppressed dialogue, many ufologists wondered if the report revealed the entire truth.
There is a vast treasure trove of KGB documents on this topic somewhere that no one has ever seen. And I know the KGB did release some documents in the early 90s, but it is presumed by a lot of folks that the best stuff is still hidden in a vault somewhere.
What happened to the files? Who keeps them? Until we ourselves go through the files, we cannot say whether what Mr. Platov and Mr. Sokolov say is true.
It will probably never be known exactly how many Soviet UFO files remain classified, or what they contain. Most in the scientific community doubt any smoking guns exist in the unseen files.
People in Russia still have a very powerful sense of gossip and rumors, because under Soviet days, so many things were illegal to talk about, illegal to know. So they replaced the reality with a very rich mythology. UFOs became part of that mythology in Russia, and it's still a very powerful theme over there.
But many UFO enthusiasts remain suspicious, believing that the proof of alien encounters exists and is still being hidden.